before the end, I want to touch on Chelsea. Obviously a disappointing weekend, David. Obviously, we spoke to you on the match reaction show, really, and got your views on it. Anyone there got a take on Chelsea? Is this just a little blip? But I see some people are trying to attack it, and Maresca's going to have his second half of the season collapse like at Leicester. You're smiling there, Henry. Do you think this is more than just a blip for Chelsea with that little smirk on your face?
No, I'm not smiling. I'm smiling. I don't think it's going to be a huge blip, but it just reminds me of the confidence that David had when they played Ipswich, and then it all backfired. And kind of since then, it hasn't really gone to plan, has it? Well, Chelsea's a weird one for me because there's a lot of Chelsea fans I've seen on the socials that are screaming at Enzo because he's not using his bench and like he's not utilising his squad to full effect. But the games they've played, they've got to be winning some. Fulham, Everton, Ipswich and Palace. And that's twice this season they have not beaten Palace. I think they've got to bring a centre-back in. That has got to be the priority. They were linked today with Gahey. I think he'd be a good sign in returning to Chelsea. But if they don't do any business, then I would be slightly concerned if I was a Chelsea fan looking at that, at the injuries they've got a centre-back. But it is quite enjoyable to see some of the Chelsea fans, not necessarily David, but some of the Chelsea fans coming out there with Dwayne Johnson level chest, and now it is just slowly being reeled back in. Now they've put their jackets on, and now they're covering up their chest. I don't know what the fixtures they've got coming up, but if they don't sign a centre back this window, I would be astonished because they have got to. They look so weak at the back.
Our next two league fixtures are Bournemouth, which is issue, and Wolves, who are like.
Is that
we don't know what they're like, but they seem to be better than they were. So is that again two not easy games. I just think it's funny because as I do say, I've said it before, I'll say it again. The average football fan, the ones who don't watch the Terrace, I have to put that in before I say it. Isn't that right? So like right. They've for some reason people genuinely thought that we were in a title race, even though 4 months before they were saying that the club's finished and they have no idea what they're doing. So I was again to me someone who can be objective about their own club. This kind of doesn't surprise me. If you watch those games back, we win most of those games again. The Fulham game again should have been 3 or 4 goals up. Typical Chelsea. It doesn't happen, and then Fulham come back and then Harry Wilson scores his goal, whatever. The Everton game was actually more. They were actually very good defensively. Again, probably should have had a penalty. Is what it is. That's football. It happens. And then Ipswich was never a penalty. That was awful. That was actually genuinely awful. That was literally a dive. And then again, we don't win the game. Is what it is. And then the last game should have 1-0 up, comfortably winning the game. Should have made it 2 or 3, and then we don't. So ironically, this sounds like exactly what I sounded like 12 months ago. So it doesn't really. Again, this kind of issue of Chelsea not being able to finish games off isn't a surprise because we're still working with the same players that we had last year. We didn't bring somebody in who's meant to be a killer, and then they're not a killer, and that'd be a different issue. We kept the same, like the main forwards, and then we added Sancho and Neto. They're not goal scorers; they're creators.
Are people kind of blaming Jackson? Do you think?
Well, Jackson deserves to be blamed. The last couple of games, he's missed very opportunities you'd expect him to score as a main striker. If you think Jackson's good enough to be our main striker, as in like a league winning striker, then you have to call him out for these last 4 games because he's not been good enough.
You know what? I'm not surprised Chelsea are having a little bit of a dip right now because with being halfway through the season, teams have a little bit more of a sample size. They know how you're going to play, and they're now a little bit more used to what you're going to do under the new manager. And also, teams are taking you guys a little bit more serious now that you're higher up the Premier League table, where the last couple of years, teams were kind of coming up to your ground or you're going to their ground and they're just playing their football. Southampton tried to do that. You slapped them. So teams are now being a little bit more cautious. And with cautious teams, you're going to face a little bit more low blocks, 5 at the backs, 3 at the backs, more defensive football, and you're going to struggle to break them down. It's by design, the way that they're playing. It's not necessarily Chelsea's attack is terrible. Their game plan is working to a perfection, and when these teams like Crystal Palace are getting a draw against Chelsea, or these teams over the last couple of weeks are getting wins from Chelsea, the reason why Maresca is being called out is because he's not later in games when your players are huffing and puffing and they're tired, I'm told from Dan, you guys have good squad depth. The manager doesn't seem to trust them.
Well, the thing is, if you look at, I don't know what's happened to my camera, by the way. If you look at our bench from Saturday, we didn't have one midfielder on it. So Enzo couldn't sub on a midfielder, unless you want to count Renato Vega as a DM, but I don't think he's a DM. I think he's more of a fullback.
He's played
and I just
before.
and as I've said before, I've said it. I said it in the group chat. I don't think the pivot of, well, it's not really a pivot because again, it changes. But Enzo and Caicedo as a midfield two, it's not good enough to sustain it for long periods of time. The when we were doing really well was when it was Caicedo and Lavia, and then we had Enzo further forward. That's when I thought Chelsea were playing their best football, and that's because Lavia and Caicedo as a pairing works way better because they cover up for each other's gaps, and then Enzo was able to play further forward and progress the ball a lot better. When it's just Caicedo and Enzo, you kind of leave yourself a little bit exposed where Enzo's, yes, his defensive work rate's improved, but he's not a Lavia. So it doesn't cover up that hole. So when we're in the transition, we concede so much more chances. When it was Lavia and Caicedo, teams would try and counter, but we could cover so much more space and we could win the ball back. Surprisingly, Lavia went down in the Spurs game. And ever since the Spurs games, when the form's dropped, I feel like if you're watching Chelsea and you actually understand what's going on, these kind of issues, like it kind of makes more sense why we are conceding more chances on goal. But again, some people don't want to look. Some people just want to shout at a manager or go and be very basic, which I'll like. You can do it if you want, like that's fine. But then ultimately, you're just guessing at this point. If you actually want to talk about football, then I think the fact that we were facing teams that were playing us in a low block, and when we had the ability to put Caicedo at right back and then move him into midfield and have him invert and then play Enzo further forward, it just gave us a far better base to play off. So that's my personal opinion on it. But I think if you're looking at these past 4 games and your conclusion is Maresca's not a good enough manager, or it's all going to fall apart, or with like, how come Enzo wasn't able to sustain what he showed me before? I just think you're looking at football in the wrong way, because you can't skip these kind of things. You just can't.
How do you see it, Nobbins? Do you agree with that? Do you feel like there's almost been like an overreaction to this poor run of form by Chelsea?
Yeah, I was just about to say, like, following on what David said, totally agree. Like, it's Maresca's first season as a top flight manager as well. Like, it's his first season with Chelsea. So there's going to be teething issues. There's going to be learning curves. There's going to be, runs where you maybe don't play as well as you would like to. So, yeah, I don't think it's an issue at all. I think, like, Chelsea did a lot better in the first half of the season than I thought they were going to do. Maybe like the average mean will even out, and maybe they'll like finishing like maybe closer to like 4th or something, rather than like the 3rd that they look to maybe end with. It's not a problem at all. No, it's absolutely fine. It's a relatively young team. It's a relatively inexperienced manager. I don't think it's a problem that there have been some lackluster performances recently. Teams are allowed blips, especially if it's a team which has got a manager which is in their first ever top flight season. If it continues, like from now until March, then it's a different conversation, because then there might just be something fundamentally wrong. But it's only like 3 or 4 games. I would not be panicking right now, to be honest.
No, I think that's right. Like,
another thing that I found quite funny, it was like, again, if you looked at the underlying numbers, Chelsea were never functioning at a league title winning like rate anyway. So the problem is that because we were overperforming, if you don't look at those numbers, you just see, Chelsea keep winning games. They're gonna keep winning games. So now it's kind of gone the other way, where the games are a bit closer, but instead of winning them before, you're now losing them because you're losing out just slightly in an area, or your player doesn't finish a chance that they should do to make it 2-0 and change the momentum of the game.
Yeah,
that small shift can just cause people to change their opinions, because we are just very instant gratification now. So like people just can't wait.
Yeah, just on that, Dave. Like last thing from me is like, just because you brought up underlying numbers there, you're like absolutely spot on. Like defensively, your underlying numbers, like in terms of like what you've expected to have conceded, it's actually worse than City's. Like, it's like sort of like mid-table. So you're operating with sort of like in theory, like a mid-table defense. So yeah, if anyone thinks that you can actually win the title with that, is like mad. Like as Henry said, you need a centre back at some point to go to the next level. That's absolutely fine. Yeah.
Romano's just retweeted his Gahey tweet, so that kind of tells me that deal's a lot closer down the line than the original tweet. If they bring Gahey in, I don't think Chelsea will have a problem at all finishing top 4. I think the top 4 will be Liverpool, City, Arsenal, and Chelsea, in whatever order you want to put it in. That would definitely be the top 4.
Yeah. Listen, look, I think Chelsea's is the blip, and they'll get through it. As you say, I think most Chelsea fans know they need to improve that back line in multiple ways. And a signing like Mark Gahey will go a long way to securing them Champions League football. And I know it's a shame Miguel had to leave, but that's why I look at the transfer window as being important, because Chelsea can ignore that until the summer, but that might cost them 50-60 million pound in Champions League money. Because as you say, they've been, I know that some people are calling you out here for saying they're overperforming their kind of midfield numbers, but there is an element of truth to that. And ironically, he gets a lot of stick, Sanchez, but Sanchez has saved quite a number of goals in recent games. A lot of really good saves from him as an example. But what you really want to win the Premier League, what you really want to be a top team, is your goalkeeper not being forced into making so many. In those years where David De Gea was looked at as the best in the Premier League, it was great that he was making the saves, but I was frustrated that he was having to make so many saves in a game. And I think that's a 1-0 Nottingham Forest. Wow, this team is serious, mate. Gibbs White back at his old ground as well. Crazy. 1-0.
Yeah, the thing is, again, when it comes to Sanchez, one thing again, this is why you can't purely do stats and you can't purely do eye tests, because I think you need both of them to work. When you watch Robert Sanchez, you can see he makes great saves, and that's brilliant. But his lack of ability to be a sound goalkeeper who doesn't make mistakes and doesn't put your defense under pressure is something that will cost Chelsea points, and it already has. When I look at the Crystal Palace situation, I look at the game situation, where we are, how the game's going, and I look at Sanchez and go, if you could go back, you probably would just pass it to Joshua Chempong, because he was, or it might have been Cole, I can't remember, but you would have probably just passed to the centre back and let it play out. Instead, what he tries to do is he tries to go, I'm going to ping this into Cole Palmer, and then we're just going to hope that he does something magical. And by the time the ball's got to him and Palmer's taken a touch, he's already got 2 people on and he loses him. Yes, Palmer can play it, maybe Palmer sees the 2 people coming a bit earlier and then he can play it off them whatsoever. But again, I'm not gonna. For me to go at Cole Palmer is crazy, because he's the main reason why we're even in this situation in the first place.
Yeah.
But literally, it's not one of those things. I'm not blaming Sanchez for that, but it's just one of those things where it's like, the reason why Man City was so good when Edison was there was that Edison, when he was playing, whether he had to do it or not, or Edison knew that if I play the ball in this position to this player, it's going to allow them to do this. I don't think Robert Sanchez is doing that. I think Robert Sanchez is seeing someone open and just pinging it, but he's not thinking about what pinging it to that person actually leads to. And that's where I think it becomes a problem.
Yeah. Well, and that's probably, that kind of level of, it's decision making, but it's your ability, it's your mental capacity within a game. It's why the very best players are so good, because they see, like, some players play, and goalies included, play drafts. Some are playing chess, and they can see more moves ahead of themselves, and there's a lot of truth to that.